Hi everyone, and welcome back to Farrand on Film. It's our first episode in a very long time, and we are bringing you our franchise Star Wars episodes. Where we all knew that we couldn't get 9 films into one episode, so we've decided to split them over 3. We're going to do them in order. So this is the original trilogy. Next week we're going to bring you the prequel trilogy, and then the week after we're going to bring you the sequel trilogy. Um, if you're fans of the podcast, you will know by now probably the 2 people that I have on with me, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. We have Ollie. If you want to say hi,
Hiya.
Ollie. There we go. And Holly. And basically, we're just going to treat it like a franchise ep. I'm going to take you through all the stuff to do with the original trilogy. So we're going to kick off with A New Hope, share our thoughts. It might get a little bit heated somewhere down the line. Right at the back end of our sequel trilogy, we are going to do our rankings similar to how Tom and I did Harry Potter, and see if we can come up with a definitive Star Wars ranking for Farrand on Film. So we'll kick off then. We'll kick off with A New Hope. Now, obviously, this was released in 1977. Wikipedia refers to it as an American space opera, which I think is hilarious. It was directed by George Lucas, produced by Lucasfilm, distributed by 20th Century Fox. Stars Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Peter Cushing, Alec Guinness, David Prowse, James Earl Jones, Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, and Peter Mayhew. Obviously, the first installment of the original trilogy, and basically the 4th episode in what we're referring to as the Skywalker saga. This all came about when George Lucas had the idea for a science fiction film in the vein of Flash Gordon around the time that he completed his first film, THX 1138, and began working on a treatment for Star Wars after he released American Graffiti. If you're unaware and you've lived under a rock, Star Wars focuses on the journey of Luke Skywalker, played by Mark Hamill, who, along with his wizened Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, played by Alec Guinness, smuggler Han Solo, played by Harrison Ford, and Wookiee companion Chewbacca, Peter Mayhew, all attempt to free Princess Leia, played by Carrie Fisher, from the clutches of the tyrannical Galactic Empire. At the same time, the heroes try to deliver the plans for the Empire's planet-destroying space station, the Death Star, which are carried by droids R2-D2, Kenny Baker, and C-3PO Anthony Daniels, to the Rebel Alliance, but face opposition from Sith Lord Darth Vader, who's played by David Prowse, but voiced by James Earl Jones. After a turbulent production, Star Wars was released in a number of theaters in the United States on May 25th, 1977, became a huge blockbuster hit, leading to a much wider release after that point. The film opened to critical acclaim, most notably for its groundbreaking visual effects. It surpassed Jaws to become the highest grossing film of all time, and it kept that record until the release of E.T. in 1982. And when adjusted for inflation, it is now the second highest grossing film in North America behind Gone with the Wind, and received it was the 4th highest grossing film in the world, and received 10 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, and it won 7, which is kind of unprecedented now for the Star Wars films. In 1989, it became one of the first 25 films that was selected by the US Library of Congress for preservation in the National Film Registry, and at that time it was the most recent film and the only one chosen from the 1970s. It became a pop cultural phenomenon, launched an industry of tie-in products, novels, comics, video games, amusement parks, merchandise, toys, games, clothing, and many other spin-offs. As Ollie said to me a couple of weeks ago, usually on the franchise ones, I say, this is all the things it spun off to. I ain't doing that because we'll be here all day, and that will be a podcast in itself. And obviously, the success of the film led to 2 more sequels for this original trilogy, and then obviously where we are now, which is why we need 3 episodes to talk about it. So I'll kick us off with the first one. I remember watching this, I think, for the first time when I was in year 7 as part of a film club that we had on at school. And I just remember really liking the simplicity of it. There was nothing overly done with it. The plot was very simple. It was basically, we need to blow up the Death Star by the end of this. And there was a little bit of world building, but I think at that time maybe he was hedging his bets a little bit and didn't want to move too far into leaving cliffhangers for the future. And then obviously, whereas now everything's sequel bait and prequel bait and all that kind of stuff. And I think I most recently watched this possibly in university, which was quite a while ago. It was on our sci-fi module. And I remember John Evans, hi John, if you're listening, bringing in 2 lightsabers to the screening for whatever reason, and then him trying to choreograph a lightsaber fight with me, which trying to choreograph me to do anything doesn't really work very well. So yeah, he had it all in his head, and basically it went from there. But I'm going to assume for you guys who are big Star Wars fans that there was a pivotal point in your life where you watched this for the first time. So Ollie, do you want to go first?
This wasn't the first Star Wars film I watched, and I will make that, very, I will make you all, to quote one of our favorite people, acutely aware when we eventually do get to that particular film. But off the back of that first film, I kind of fell in love with because I was about 6 or 7 when I first got into it. Had the tie-in video game as well, and then my auntie, one of those friend of the family aunties, was like, "Oh, you need to see these," and she just gave me the original trilogy on VHS, and I think they might have even been the unspecialized ones, the original theatrical releases of 4, 5, and 6. And
was that before they made any edits to them?
Any edits at all, which I don't know how much we can get into that in these, because that could also be a podcast within itself, couldn't it?
If you know them, you can mention them.
Yeah.
There's some, obviously, the whole like hand shot first thing.
Yeah, so the original version I saw, Han did shoot first. Like,
Okay.
It wasn't even shot first. Greedo didn't shoot because Han just shot him in the face. But yeah, I think you summed it up really well. It's such a simple story, and I think that's what lends itself to it being this timeless classic. And feel free to kind of disagree with this. I don't think there is a more iconic opening shot in movie history. That shot of the Rebel cruiser being chased and shooting lasers back, and then you get the entire camera just at field of view being enveloped by that Star Destroyer with the John Williams music playing in the background. It's everything. And you can imagine people in 1977 seeing this for the first time, just their jaws on the floor, like, how the hell are they showing this? And having a simple story behind it allowed you to really take in some of these effects. And it's just a perfect mess of a film, isn't it? Like, because you can tell there's, you'll have all heard the stories about how this film was like massively saved in the edit. Like the rough cut of this film was an absolute disaster. And he showed it to, I can't remember who all I think Spielberg might have been one of them, but Brian De Palma was another one. He just sat down with a bunch of his director mates and showed them a rough cut of the first shot of Star Wars. And the final scene where they're taking on the Death Star, he's intercut it with footage from like World War II films, like fighter planes and stuff like that. And that's why, the Millennium Falcon is so weirdly static, because it's like a bomber and the TIE fighters are like Messerschmitts going around. But he's just cut it in. And just some of the little changes they made at that point made it the iconic film it is today. And like, for having such a good opening, the ending of that film is still one of the most suspenseful endings to any film I've ever seen. Like, it ratchets up the tension slow, like from the second the X-Wings take off from the Rebel base and you start hearing John Williams' little music and you can see them going towards the Death Star. It's just, your heart's going, even though you know exactly what's going to happen because you've seen it 1,000 times before. That scene is just beautifully constructed from start to finish. And it was nearly not that good because it was nearly just a straight up attack on the Death Star. I think it was Brian De Palma who suggested, well, why don't you have it so that the Death Star's about to blow up the Rebel base and give them a time limit? That wasn't a thing. The Rebels were originally just going to go to the Death Star and try and blow it up. And like, they made it so much more tense by having this, well, we're attacking you. It's just, I should have prepped a bit more because I'm kind of lost at this point on how much I love this film, and all the iconography from it. And yet how, like, it's clearly not the finished article. Like, this clearly wasn't intended to be a trilogy. Like, for whatever George Lucas might say, this was clearly not intended to be a trilogy. And it's like you said with sequel baiting and stuff like that. The only bit of sequel baiting they do at all in this film is Darth Vader surviving at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think in the original version, he doesn't. He just gets blown up with the rest of those TIE fighters. And someone just like, I think we might have something here. So why don't you just leave him alive? And yeah, just I'm gonna
come on to this a little bit later on, and next week for those that are listening. there's so much sequel baiting in, or like not even sequel baiting, but like prequel baiting and just trying to world build in the prequel trilogy that it gets really tedious. Like there's lines in Attack the Clones where it's just like, when we did this on there and you saved me that one time, and it's just like, come on, you're trying way too hard here just to try and expand everything so much. Whereas like again, like the simplicity of this, because I do remember the first time I saw this, when it finished, me and my mate were just like, oh, is that it? Like I think we were so kind of in tune with probably the modern blockbusters at the time, where you end up, you have the big explosion at the end, you have the big finale sequence, but then you get this debrief afterwards, and there was none of that. It was literally boom, explode, credits rolling, that's it.
And the rebels are racist because Chewie doesn't get a medal.
It's the biggest injustice in film history.
Yeah.
So Chewie doesn't get a medal. Okay.
Yeah, and that's something actually.
That.
That's something in the comics they've tried to retcon, because it's like, oh, Wookiees have so much honor, and it's like he wouldn't have wanted a medal. And it's like, fine, but that's not the reason Chewie didn't get a medal in A New Hope. The reason he didn't get a medal is because they could afford two, because they had no money.
Wow. Okay.
Like,
no, it's space racism. We all know it's space
racism, if you will.
Yeah.
But it's just, and I was kind of alluding to that, like so many of the little imperfections in this film help make it that more iconic. Like the Death Star trench, which is so pivotal to the final showdown, that was only there because they couldn't glue the two halves of the Death Star together properly.
Nice.
Like, so when they tried to do it, there was a little bit out, and they were like, well, we can't afford another model, so it's got a trench. Yeah, it's got deliberately got a trench.
Serious weakness in the design.
Yeah. Mind you, I've seen a good video on that. It's like the idea that 2-meter exhaust port is the only exhaust port for an entire moon-sized space station is great. And a literal space wizard is the only person who could make the shot to destroy it. So I think any realistic engineer would be like, that's fine. That's not a real weakness.
Space wizard.
He is a space wizard.
Holly, when was the first time that you watched this?
Well, I'm trying to rack my brains because I think it must just have been something that I saw every time it came on telly.
Okay.
I know you've spoken quite a lot, Adam, about how you didn't really have a cine literate upbringing. Like, it wasn't, your parents weren't giving you films and saying, oh, this is my favorite film and we should watch this at this time. And I'm really similar. I know my parents kind of like Star Wars, or at least my mum kind of likes Star Wars. I think she saw them in the cinema or whatever. She's definitely not geeky about it or anything. But I think we just watched films when they came on telly. And Star Wars was just on telly so often that I think I probably saw it when I was very young, but it didn't have any impact on me. So I can't think of a time where I watched it and I was like, this is amazing. It was always just a thing that I kind of knew I liked. My kind of little bit of my family is like quite a lot younger than the rest of my family. All my cousins are like a good 10, 15 years older than me. And I remember going to their house and seeing one of them had a Lego, not Ebon Hawk. One of them had a Lego Millennium Falcon at one point, and just thinking this is the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And they went on this big conversation with my mum about Star Wars and everything. I was just sitting there listening to it, and I had no idea what they were talking about, but I wanted to know what they were talking about. It just seemed so cool. So yeah, it kind of creeped up on me, and I guess I remember watching them again and really thinking about them when I was at university and I was studying film. And really struck by how much it's just the perfect hero story. It is absolutely perfect.
It's so quintessential. It's so archetypical of it, isn't it?
Yeah, you can take something like The Wizard of Oz, which would be another really wonderful hero's journey, and map it like beat by beat to Star Wars: A New Hope. I think like the opening shot of Luke looking out across Tatooine and looking at the moons. That's twin suns. Oh my god. That would be, that's the somewhere over the rainbow moments. And then meeting this ragtag bunch of people. One is really clever, bit scarecrowy looking. One's a big hairy pile of maybe a lion. One's plucky and made out of metal. it really is. It sticks out to me as just a classic hero story, and I love it. I everyone in it, all the characters are just wonderfully introduced, I think. But as you said, if it wasn't planned as a trilogy, I think their arcs are within that film, and it feels complete and it feels right. It's wonderful.
Have you seen much Kurosawa, Adam? Like Seven Samurai and stuff like that?
No, but I remember my film studies teacher in college making that connection.
Yeah.
I mean, and it blew my mind in a weird way, because instead of me being like, oh my God, that makes so much sense, it was more of I was so perplexed by it that actually it was a media teacher. So I've spoken to students about this before. I didn't do very well in my original GCSEs. I went to college and basically resat my GCSE year. And it was at that point where I did media, psychology, business, and resat my maths. And it was one of the media teachers in that year. So I wasn't really doing film, but I was doing the film teacher's enrichment, which was film appreciation, which was like the first time I'd seen like The Big Lebowski and stuff like that. So I was getting to know him. And then one of our media teachers just said, oh yeah, Star Wars is a space Western, when we were doing stuff about genre. And I was just like, what? Like, that is mad. And I could, for whatever reason, it just did not sink into my head and even think about it. And it was only when I saw Nick, the film studies teacher, later on, where I said, oh, we were told today that like Star Wars is a space Western. And he said, oh yeah, because it links back to all this Kurosawa stuff with Seven Samurai. And then I think he showed me a clip of Seven Samurai. And that was the point where I was like, oh yeah, it really does, doesn't it?
It's a lot of visual motifs, yeah. And like Darth Vader's design, you can see how much of that they've taken from some traditional samurai armor in some aspects of the design, whilst making it fit into this futuristic way. And it weirdly, it's a nice little point I'm going to bring in later, I think, because it was something I noticed when playing a game recently. But just the look and everything about even the terrible, awkward lightsaber fight in this, I love, because it is just. And I don't know if either of you have seen it. There's a video on YouTube called, I think it's SC. I think it's meant to be Scene 38 Revisited or something. And it's this little ragtag YouTube company who've taken the Obi-Wan Darth Vader fight from New Hope and given it a modern coat of paint. Like, they've intercut it with like the old footage and some of the original dialogue and stuff like that. But they've just made it look like a more modern choreographed lightsaber fight, and it is incredible. Like, it would be really jarring if they just suddenly cut this into the film today, but like, compared to just a couple of older blokes just kind of being like just kind of poking at each other with their lightsabers really awkwardly, like, because they wanted to pretend that they were really heavy, like, even if they weren't, because they got away with that quite later, but they wanted to pretend that these were really heavy for some reason. But even that, and just
we do end up with like acrobatics later on,
which I don't have a problem with, really. I think that's fine, and you do start to get that in this trilogy as well,
right?
Like, it's only it is only this lightsaber fight where it is a bit, or like, they were not thinking about the fight choreography too much in this, and you don't get a sense of like how much of a threat Darth Vader is at all in this film, I don't think.
Because the comparison that I made on the Harry Potter podcast was that there's a scene in Order of the Phoenix towards the end where Dumbledore and Voldemort are just winging like spells at each other with the wands, and Harry's just watching on. And I said to Tom, like, that to me was so A New Hope, of like Luke just watching Obi-Wan and Darth Vader. And actually, I started really getting into Harry Potter when I rewatched them all towards the end, because I was just like, these wand battles are just lightsaber battles, just like the choreographed in the same way. And I just think, like, if they'd done more of that, like they end up doing in Star Wars, it would have been more of like an actiony kind of thing.
It felt like they tried to go that, especially around the Deathly Hallows. They were just straight up having one battles like shootouts.
They weren't even saying spells anymore.
Yeah, they were just like, and just stuff was exploding around them. But and I mean, this isn't a knock on Harry Potter, because I love the books, But again, you can, Holly's talking about being able to map that hero story. You can do exactly that with Harry Potter. And even some of the characters that cross over, the idea that Harry is Luke, Dumbledore is Obi-Wan, Snape is actually Vader, because he's the bad guy who comes good in the end. Spoilers, I guess. Voldemort
we're not on Return of the Jedi yet.
Yeah, Voldemort is Palpatine, Hermione is Leia, Ron is you've got all of these really weird and it's not just like on a surface level, like some of their core characteristics are kind of there as well.
Mr. Film Studies, what is the theory that there are only a certain number of characters in any film?
Props, spheres of action. So basically, the idea is that you always get a hero, you always get a villain, you get a princess. And great lesson I had with a couple of students a couple of years ago was that we were applying this to the Dark Knight, and we came out with the Two-Face actually in the Dark Knight is the princess, because the amount of times that he needs saving by the hero and things like that. And then you get Princess's father, Donor, which gives them something like a magical property. Dispatcher, where they send them on the way, all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah, so
like 6 original stories that you can possibly tell as well, a very similar one to that.
So I think that's because, like we said this before on the podcast, the weird one when we talk about films that we like is that we all kind of go, yeah, I don't really know what else to say.
Yeah.
But then when
There's
we get
no
into
arguments
stuff that,
we have.
yeah, when we get into stuff that we don't like, that's when.
I mean,
we haven't mentioned much about Leia. We should talk about Leia in the new.
That isn't on, because Leia's, like, especially for the time, what a character. She isn't. She is being heralded as this damsel in distress, and then the opening thing she says to our beloved hero is a snarky comment about him being short. And
I adore the story that Carrie Fisher had no intention of doing a British accent,
but then just got swept up with Peter Cushing.
She was just so nervous in that first scene that she walked out and an English accent came out in order to be snarky, and then because it was so perfect, she had to do it.
But it's that one scene, really. Like, if you listen to the rest of her, she's very old Hollywood. The Imperial Senate will not sit still for this. Like, she's very transatlantic in a lot of her other scenes, and it's just that scene opposite Peter Cushing, who, and there's another fun side fact, you never see his feet all that much because his boots were too small for him, so they filmed him above his feet so he could wear his slippers.
Nice.
But all like the 3 main actors, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, because they were all quite young. Harrison was a little bit older, but they were similar age, like early to mid-20s, and they would just mess around on set all the time, except when one of 2 people was there, Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing, because when they were up against these big bad Hollywood greats up the Brits, when they were up against these bad boys, they were like, no, we're going to be proper serious now. And because Peter Cushing was obviously lovely, but he's very, very, very good at being a villain. And yeah, Carrie Fisher was just, the more you tighten your grip, Tarkin. Like, all of a sudden, this British accent just comes calling out. And Alec Guinness hated Star Wars as well. Like, he hated that he was associated with it so heavily. And he doesn't hate it like Harrison Ford hates it now. I think he was glad he was in it. He understood the point of it. He just didn't like that it was the thing he was most heavily associated with, which I can kind of understand.
Right at the end of your career.
Yeah.
A very, very star-studded, like, serious career.
Wasn't Billy D. Williams, didn't he audition to be Han Solo? He was one of the auditionees for Han Solo as well. Billy D.
That sounds like one of those stories where it's like I went for the bigger role and then I got a side role.
But I think it was George Lucas was like, look, you're great. If something comes up, you're in the back of my mind. But Kurt Russell auditioned for it as well, and that was a definite because you can see an audition. There's an audition tape of him going for it, and it's really good. Okay. But I think it was a case of he was a pretty big name. And it might have been that he commanded a certain salary, or it might have just been that George thought it might be slightly distracting, whereas Harrison Ford at the time was a relative unknown. I think he'd been in American Graffiti. I think that was it.
I think it was one of those cases where, they put all the actors into groups already and you just audition in your group. And sometimes the best actor for the role is in a different group, but because the other actors are perfect, they go with that.
Yeah, because the
because
chemistry's
they've got
better.
chemistry. And yeah, I think.
But I think-
Although there are so many myths about
sounds-
Star Wars,
yeah.
I've read all sorts of contradictory things about the
Yeah.
casting. But the story I heard was that they were just in the test footage group, and they liked them so much they just got them all, and they didn't
And
bother
they do
picking and
really
choosing
work,
from
don't
other
they?
groups.
Yeah, that's
the
the
thing I was
chemistry
gonna-
between the three as well.
Yeah. The thing I was going to say about Leia is at our school we are allowed to wear badges on our lanyards, and I have a Princess Leia badge, and it's the one that most people ask who's that, because obviously it's quite small and you can't really see who it is. And I've been asked lots of times why I wear it, and I say it's just a meme that I saw, but I always say it's to remind me that my childhood princesses grew up to be generals. And that's what Leia means to me. I
Nice.
think I grew up with Disney, and there are some wonderful Disney films which are very empowering and wonderful, especially later ones when we get towards Mulan and things. But Princess Leia sticks out so vividly in my mind as just amazing
This
as
is
a
the-
role model until we get to bikini territory, whatever. But in that first one, just fantastic.
This is the woman who consoled a farmer boy about his teacher who he'd known for a couple of days dying, not long after her entire planet had been blown up. She's a great, strength. Like, he's there whining about some old hermit who he'd known for days at most. And Leia has literally, like, everyone she grew up with, everyone she has ever known and loved, except people who might be in the rebellion, they're all dead. Along with everything, everywhere she walked as a child. Like,
Did you just call Obi-Wan a hermit?
he was a that's what Luke calls him.
He's straight up a
No, I
hermit.
know. It's quite funny.
He is a hermit. He's a great
Right.
hermit, but
He's
and
the
it
best
did, and
hermit.
it did, and this was the start as well of something that's is so important to me in Star Wars. Ben Burtt, what a job he did. For those of you who do not know, listening, Ben Burtt was the sound designer of Star Wars, and every single sound in Star Wars is now just firmly etched into our psyche. The blaster sounds, which is just him going along and whacking a cable into making that noise. The TIE fighters, I don't even know how they achieved that noise. The lightsaber noise was made by mistake. He was messing around with a microphone, and he was near a bit of his old equipment that was broken, and it made that noise that you constantly hear in the background of a lightsaber. He was like, "Oh, that sounds good." And then the cracking was when he started hitting two aerials against each other on this broken TV set, and it's just how.
Yeah.
And the doors are just taking a piece of paper out of an envelope
Oh my god.
and just treated.
Sound design blows my mind.
Yeah,
I
it's-
always show like a Foley video to the students when we do sound, and even that's just like, oh, this is walking on sand, and we're wearing tennis rackets on our shoes, and we're walking on like crunchy paper and leaves and things like that. Yeah, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. Okay, let's get into Empire then, because I feel like this is a point where Ollie's going to talk most. And again tomorrow, because spoilers, we're recording an all-time top 10 tomorrow.
Edit
feel
it out,
like-
man. We need to keep suspense up.
We all know what it's going to be.
Are
You all
you
know
going to put
mine.
Hunchback as your all-time #1 film?
Oh, sod off! Don't.
There's the first word we're going to bleep out, kids.
I'm having that. It's fine. Empire Strikes Back then. So, also known as Episode 5, is not filmed in 1980, released in 1980. So 3 years after the original. And yeah, it's George Lucas. He didn't direct this one. Irving Kershner directed this one. And it was written by Lee Brackett and Lawrence Kasdan based on a story by George Lucas. So the story is set 3 years after the events of the first film, as the Galactic Empire hunts the scattered Rebel Alliance all throughout the galaxy. While Darth Vader relentlessly pursues Skywalker's friends Han Solo, Princess Leia, and Chewbacca, Luke studies the Force under Jedi Master Yoda to prepare himself for his upcoming confrontation with Vader. Following the success of Star Wars, Lucas hired Brackett to write the sequel, and following her death in 1978, he outlined the Star Wars saga as a whole and wrote the next draft himself before hiring Kasdan. He chose not to direct due to his obligations with ILM and handling the financing, and passed the duty to Kershner, his former professor. Filmed in March to September of 79, it faced difficult production that included actor injuries, the death of the writer Lee Brackett, a set fire, and fines from the Writers and Directors Guilds of America. The initial budget was 18 million, but ballooned to 33 million. And by the time the production had concluded, it made it one of the most expensive films ever made at the time. It was released on May 17th, 1980, highest grossing film in 1980. Initially met with mixed critical reviews, which surprised me when I read that. Is now hailed as many by being the best film in the Star Wars saga and one of the greatest films ever made. The film has grossed over 550 million worldwide after it's been adjusted for inflation, and it's the second highest grossing sequel of all time. In 2010, it was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry, same as A New Hope, and it has had a significant impact on filmmaking and popular culture, being regarded as a rare example of a sequel that transcends the original. The climax in which Vader's revealed to Luke that he is his father is often cited as one of the greatest. Oh, you didn't know? Is often cited as one of the greatest plot twists in history. I went back to this because, as I said to Ollie, I think I'd only ever seen it once, to be honest. But I went back to it quite recently. Yeah, I enjoyed it. While I was doing my cooking. And I think the start on Hoth is good. Yeah. And what it surprised me because all of a sudden, like, Luke's on Hoth, and then everyone else goes to try and save him and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, yeah, this is good. And then the one bit that I was getting a little bit tedious with, and I saw a meme about this morning, so I'm not going to take credit for this, of only when you are a parent do you realize how Yoda dies because Luke asks too many questions.
That's the next film.
Oh, is it?
That's
They
Jedi.
put Empire on it. I did think, like, I'm sure he didn't die in that one. They put
No.
Jedi on it, right? So I've read the meme wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, yeah, no, I actually quite like the idea of, because I forgot this at the time, that the plot twist that everyone talks about is obviously that Vader saying to Luke, "I am your father." There's actually a little bit of a plot twist of Luke going, "I'm looking for Yoda. I'm looking for a Jedi Master," and Yoda's just going, "All right, I'll take you to him. All right.
Yeah.
It's not me, you know." I like the Han, Leia, and Lando stuff. I quite like the introduction of Lando as a character. And the whole kind of bait and switch of Lando saying, "Oh, come on, we'll go in here," and then actually Darth Vader just sat at the end of the table and I've done you all over. The one thing I did write down, and I don't know if you guys agree with this, Han is a bit of a lech in this film, because every second thing is, "Oh, give us a kiss. You know you want to. Oh, come on, let's go around this corner. Oh, you know you can't resist me." And then eventually the kiss, and then you get, the "I love you, I know" thing as he goes into carbonite. Which we might talk about this later. I enjoyed the Mandalorian callback to the carbonite. Yeah, I don't think I was going to spoil anything there, Hall. But yeah, no, I enjoyed that. Obviously, Boba Fett, I think there's a good character as well. But yeah, I like it, Ollie. That's as much as I can say really for now. And then I'll tell you where it is in my rankings later on. But right, I'm going to let Holly go first, and then Ollie can go shaft at that point.
Yeah, because Ollie is going to talk an awful lot about this film, and rightly so.
You can't see this, people, but he's limbering up.
I'm going to jump in quick. Yeah, I adore this one so much. And I think when we talk about A New Hope, quite a lot of that is black and white, goodies, baddies. It very much is a children's adventure film. I love it. That's not to do it down in any way, but there is very little gray area. Han Solo a little bit, but he comes good at the end. Empire is where all the gray comes in, and I love it so much. It's like, right, we gave you this wonderful children's film, now it's for adults, and you've got to work out everybody's allegiances, what people are thinking about in the background, how some decisions that look easy on the surface might be affecting other people. Like, Lando has to worry about all the people who live on his planet and on his mining platform. Like, if he just stood up for the right thing and saved his friends, he'd probably be killing all the people he was in charge of. All that gray comes in this film, and that's why I really love it so much. The big memory for me is Hoth, and I had again, from my cousins, I got hand-me-down computer console, game consoles from them, and one of the games was one where you're in a X-wing, and you have to, you're in Mos Eisley first, and you have to kill all the little Imperial droids, and then the second level is Hoth, and you have to shoot out the wires to tie around the legs. And I could never get past that level. I've never seen past that level in that game because I just can't do it. So every time I watch the film, I'm like, they're so skilled. I never ever got past that level on the game.
I mean, to be fair, most of the pilots don't get past that level. Like, it's only like even Luke gets shot down.
There you go. There you go. I won't take it too personally.
If Luke Skywalker can't do it, Holly, there's no shame in you not being able to do it either.
Thank you. I think for me, that film takes the classic plot beats of that first one, the hero's journey, and just smashes it to pieces and says, right, we're going to split up that lovely group with amazing chemistry that you really, really love, completely split up, gone, smashed into rubble. And it still works, and it works so perfectly. I felt like it was a risk doing the film that way. I don't know if it was at the time. I don't know how many films had done a sequel like that.
Well, Adam said it, didn't he? Like, it clearly was, because it wasn't well received at the time. It was a massive risk.
In my experience, that's the first film that I saw with an ending like that, so bleak. That last shot, it's so bleak. And I remember as a child watching it and just being like, we need to put the next one on right now. I can't stop and do anything until I know they're all going to be okay. It's wonderful. Talking about Harrison Ford, though, getting really creepy in that film, there is a wonderful YouTube channel called Pop Culture Detective Agency that I really like. And it focuses on masculinity in film. And how it's sometimes portrayed positively and sometimes portrayed harmfully. And they have a great video on the harmful masculinity of Harrison Ford. And it's obviously not him as a person, but for some reason in in his biggest films, Empire, Indiana Jones, particularly Temple of Doom, and Blade Runner, they have an almost exactly the same scene where he's almost violently telling a woman that she does want him when she's clearly repeatedly saying no. I forgot
about Blade Runner. Blade Runner is really bad.
It's really bad. Star Wars is the least bad of those examples. But really interesting how it's Harrison Ford and it's exactly the same thing happening in each one. I do love their love story though. It was probably the first film love story that I really, really wanted to be a part of,
because it's in the backdrop of all this horror. Like everyone, Leia's entire planet's been blown up. Han Solo's had a terrible upbringing,
but they're sparky as well, and a little bit. It's a bit Beauty and the Beast-y. The original version, that when they're shouting at each other and Belle gets angry, and you don't often see women angry in film in that way. And Leia and Han have the same dynamic. So I do really love it.
I feel like it is one of the first to do that very... Now it's a massive cliche thing. Now when you get a film and you get those two people, one a very attractive man, one a very attractive woman, and they're just at each other's throats from the second they see each other. Nowadays, you think, oh, well, they're going to get together. Like, that's almost a given these days. And I'm struggling to think of a film before this.
There were, if we're talking golden age of Hollywood, there are really loads. Like It Happened One Night is very a kind of Leia and Han-y. If His Girl Friday, that kind of sparky dialogue. But quite a lot of them, it's they had a relationship to start off with, and then they get divorced, and then they're kind of backbiting with each other because we know they're going to get back together. I think it's the first time I saw it in an adventure film. It's certainly the first time I saw it in a film for me, for my age group. And that's why it stands out as one I really love, and Beauty and the Beast for the same reason. but yeah, there are so many things to love about this film because of the risks that it took, I think.
Let me
I
count the
just
ways.
just before Ollie goes, I just give it a quick Google. Apparently, the reason why it got mixed reviews, again, like Holly mentioned, was because people expected a straight sequel and instead got a slower, darker, more serious movie. Empire doesn't have a real ending. The action is mostly at the front of the film. The twist totally changed everything about Star Wars. Many of the audience wanted a lighter, brighter story in the style of the original, but this doubled down on the mythic aspects of the story, which then got more mixed reviews. I mean, this is someone who's going on a bit of a tangent and says some critics don't just don't get Star Wars, and they all think it's a bit weird and all that kind of stuff, which is something we might talk about a little bit later on because I know Mark Kermode's critical reaction to it has changed over the years.
Because I hate people based on that. Oh, we want a straight sequel. You would have also complained if it was like the same film. Like, why would you just have a straight sequel like that? Because straight sequels like that are terrible. There's no film I can think of where they just do the same thing again, and it's
everyone
great.
likes it.
Yeah, and everyone likes it. It's just
because like this is totally different, but The Hangover 2 was slated when it came out because it was The Hangover again, but in Thailand.
Oh, it's just it's a different country, so it must be different. No.
Yeah, it's just don't do exactly the same thing again. Try and do something different, which this does. And I would say, actually, I like it when a film builds a world, and I like it where like I can see something a little bit wider than just what I'm watching on screen and in the narrative. And I think this does it well to kind of companion and to go alongside with A New Hope. Anyway, go on, Ollie.
Because I do, based off the back of that, and one of the reasons I love this film so much is I do question whether Star Wars, for better or worse, is the franchise it is today without this film. Because beforehand, we didn't get that much of a world building. There was vague mentions to the Force, and I don't think we really saw anybody doing anything with the Force. Like, the most you got is that Luke could almost see the remote when it was shooting at him, and it gave him a good idea of when to shoot to get to to destroy the Death Star. And then immediately in the open, like in the Wampa cave where Luke's hanging upside down, you see him reaching out and the lightsaber starts to move, and you're like, wait, what? And you're all of a sudden you're seeing all these other aspects of the Force come in, which I'm gonna really have a rant about later because people whinging about, oh, they never told us the Force could do this. Well, it's a mysterious energy force. It can probably do anything it goddamn wants. Why are you whinging that it does this weird thing that you've never seen before?
So is this word? So I've written one word down. Actually, it's two words. For a later film. So I'll just say it to you now and see if this triggers a reaction. I've written Mary Poppins down for something. Is this what you're going to be? Okay.
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe
We'll come to it when we come to it.
But like you hinted at it before as well. Another plot twist in this film, which does go under the radar, and I absolutely love, and it's the reveal of Yoda. And it is indicative of everything I love about this film. It is in the right ways. It takes your expectations and turns them on its head. Obi-Wan describes Yoda as a Jedi master. So Luke clearly has this image in his head of a war hero, someone who could just lead everyone into battle and batter everyone. And he gets to Dagobah and he crashes his X-Wing and he's feeling a bit grumpy and sorry for himself. And he sees this weird little frog man with a weird speech cadence. And he's trolling him for some reason. He's like, oh, wow, you're annoying. And you sound like one of the Muppets. What's all that about? And this little thing turns out to be the most powerful Jedi who's ever existed. And all of his lessons that Yoda then gives him off of the back of that are really helping this idea that the Force, I love that idea of, because Yoda even straight up says it, wars don't make one great. And it is this idea that in this pint-sized little thing is this immense power and this immense control and understanding of that power. And that's what Luke hasn't understood this entire time. He thinks the X-Wing is too big. And Yoda's like, well, size doesn't matter. Do you judge me by my size? And Luke storms off because he's petulant and he's showing the signs that he's going to go down a darker path. And then Yoda just very calmly lifts the X-Wing up. Luke's like, I don't believe it. Yoda says, that's why you fail. Chills every single time I get to that bit. And it's just there's not a single, for me, there's not a single wasted shot, not a single wasted second, not a single wasted frame in this film. Everything is just perfect. And we go from Darth Vader, I've kind of mentioned this before in the 80s podcast. Darth Vader goes from this kind of weird, he's an important character in the first film, I guess, but he's not the main villain. If anything, he's like the main henchman. He's like Jaws in the James Bond films. He's not the big bad, you know, he's not the guy in control of the plan or anything. He's just the guy rocking up doing the Empire's business. He's still doing that here, but it's very apparent that he is in control and he doesn't give a damn what the Empire wants. He will happily send thousands of men to their deaths if it gets him and the Emperor what they want. And he suddenly just becomes this much more intimidating, evil force, to the point where now Darth Vader is recognized as one of the greatest movie villains of all time. And that isn't based off the first film. It is based off this film. And this film alone is where every time you see Darth Vader, you freeze because you're genuinely scared. One thing I think the first film suffers from is being directed by George Lucas. And George Lucas's strength as a director is clearly building a world and having kind of a simple story for you to follow in this massive world where the sights are spectacular and, you know, everything's grand. You're looking at it and you're loving it. And that's stuff that even carries over to some of the weaker films that he's directed, which we'll get onto. Here, because we've got a director who focuses on the human element, we really actually get to have that delve into characters. Luke wasn't angry that much, and you know, he's a bit of a whiny, petulant teenager in the previous film, but here you see him getting angry. You see those hints that maybe Yoda's right to be reluctant to teach him. You see Leia, you know, allowing herself to be a bit more vulnerable and maybe a bit by cohort, you know, by being forced a bit by the script, which, yeah, I was genuinely going to ask Holly how she felt about that, because it's like, even I'm quite uncomfortable watching that these days, but at the end of it, you still do get this beautiful, genuine love story. You know, you delve into the characters so much more, even the villain, like, you don't know, like, exposition in films is always a really awkward thing, like, and the bit of exposition I'm thinking right now is the Admiral is telling Darth Vader, our scouts have sighted the Millennium Falcon, my lord, but it has entered an asteroid field and we cannot, that would have just been a conversation in any other George Lucas film. Irvin Kershner takes the opportunity there to have the Admiral come in, hear some machinery, look a bit uncomfortable because Vader's helmet has been brought down on him. And you get it, because you never knew what Vader was before. Was he a bloke in a suit? Was he a robot? Like, what was he? And you see this horrifically scarred back of his head. And it's like, oh, something's gone horrific. And it's just that kind of show don't tell element to kind of hype up your expectations for what Vader is and build up this idea that there is a man in there, and this is the best lightsaber fight in the entire saga. I'm not getting off that. Luke versus Vader at the end of this film is the best lightsaber fight in the entire goddamn saga, because it
feels brutal. It feels
so
tiring. Like, you're with Luke and you know he's outmatched, and
it's a cat playing with a mouse. That's all it is. And the best lightsaber fights, like, as much as I love lightsaber fights, they are not a thing unto themselves. They should be kind of exemplified. They should have a story purpose. And I don't think there's a better example of kind of highlighting where characters are at and an idea of a personal conflict better than this one. The idea that Luke has rushed off from his training and he is nowhere near ready to take on this juggernaut of a man who is just constantly playing with his food. Like Darth Vader, literally, like, we've seen that the lightsabers are dead heavy and they want to swing them around like this. Darth Vader just starts out with one hand. And then he gets a little bit, he's like, okay, he's pretty good. I'm going to get a little bit more serious. I'm going to use two hands. No, I'm going to disarm him. You know, send him down there all too easy, freeze him in carbonite. Oh, he's better than that. I'm going to start using two hands, taking it a bit more seriously. I'm going to chuck stuff at him. And it's the perfect blend of good choreography. Darth Vader does look a little bit awkward because of his suit, but fine. But there's genuinely good fight choreography in this. The story behind it is incredible. And I just love that snapshot moment where Luke gets a hit in. Luke gets a single hit in on his shoulder. So Vader's like, right, screw this. I'm done playing with my food now. instantly cuts his hand off. As soon as Luke gets him on the shoulder, he's like, nah, done. Bang, takes his hand off. And that's the fight done. And you know, Vader could have done that at any point, but he was testing him because he wanted to see how strong he was. He wanted to see where he was at. You know, could he make him angry and turn to the dark side already? It just, that entire fight scene is just perfect. And it's scary as well. Like when Vader's like stealthing him, there's a genuine sense of dread. And I don't think you get that in, like with the dark side. I think like there could be this element of like almost horror elements creeping into Star Wars, which would be really, really good. And you get a bit of that in the lightsaber fight in this. Like Vader's like quietly stalking him and turning off his breathing so that Luke can't hear it. And then he turns it on. So like, yeah, I'm here. Just, yeah, I'll take a breath.
Do you think that they get a little bit more choreographed later on? Because I think that as much as I like it, and we're going to talk about this later, the whole Darth Maul, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan is very kind of, we're going to do this because I know the next move is this. And, you know, I think maybe this comes across as more visceral because it probably was. And probably because there was less choreography to it.
It's just less stylized choreography. There's plenty of choreography to this. It's just, it was done much more. And I think this is where that kind of Seven Samurais comparison comes in. You can see those, like, it's not every single move they do is like accurate to how a samurai would fight another samurai, but there are definitely, like, some of the stances that they hold are very much like that. And, you know, there will have been a bit more, well, if he starts swinging his sword around like that, I'll just stab him like that. It doesn't, you know, why is he prattling about like that?
I think J.J. Abrams spoke about it quite a lot with the new trilogy, how he wants to go back to the choreography of the original because it changes how the lightsaber should feel in the prequel trilogy. If they're able to do that, why weren't they able to do it in the original? And that brutality of the original is what he wanted to get back to.
Although I don't have a problem. Yeah, we'll probably talk about it more. I don't have a problem with what they did in the prequels with them, really.
No, I don't think it's necessarily a problem, but I think there's a difference between something feeling visceral and something feeling like it's been worked out.
Yeah.
Because just to bring in wrestling for a second, there's always those matches where you can tell that these people have clearly practiced everything that they were doing beforehand. And then what is becoming a more popular thing for them to do nowadays is what they call it in the ring, where basically they'll have conversations with each other in the ring about what they're going to do next. And I think that harkens back to the more visceral style of it. And actually it becomes a little bit more believable rather than, oh, you can tell that we've practiced this a couple of times today. And this is this is what we're going to do now. Okay. Are we finished on Empire?
And a little bit more.
Go on.
One thing I think gets really overlooked with this is the effects, because the original one gets a lot of praise for the effects, and rightly so. They're absolutely groundbreaking. But like you'll see the Millennium Falcon just like Han Solo, but I know a couple of maneuvers without moving them veer slightly to the left. Like there's not much by way of that. Whereas here the Millennium Falcon is barrel rolling all over the place and calling back to Hoth, because it was almost a dare from George Lucas, because a reason that they want a lot of the action scenes in space is that the models, when they crop them out, the black line stays on the outside, and you know it's easier to mask that against the space backdrop. So George Lucas just kind of went, do it in snow, like, because then you've really got to crop those lines fine. And like the AT-ATs, the big walkers, like they're stop motion, I think, but they're incredible. The snow speeders are great. The stop motion on the Tauntauns is great. Just I love this film with all of my heart.
I know. We can tell.
He just Han Soloed me. I know.
One thing I asked for one Christmas was a sleeping bag that was like a tauntaun, and then inside is his guts. And I wanted it so much, but I was told it was too grisly.
It's pretty grisly.
I didn't get it. It's sad.
Where's Holly? She's inside.
She's inside the tauntaun.
She's in the tauntaun.
Yeah.
I'll get it for myself one day.
Yeah. Right. Let's get on to the last one of this trilogy then. Oh dear. Okay. Return of the Jedi. So this is 1983. This is now directed by Richard Marquand and written by Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas. So in the film, the Galactic Empire, under the direction of the Emperor, is constructing the second Death Star in order to crush the Rebel Alliance once and for all. Since the Emperor plans to personally oversee the final stages of its construction, the Rebel fleet launches a full-scale attack on the Death Star in order to prevent its completion and to kill the Emperor, effectively bringing an end to his hold of the galaxy. Meanwhile, Luke Skywalker, now a Jedi Knight, struggles to bring his father Darth Vader back to the light side of the Force. Steven Spielberg, David Lynch, and David Cronenberg were considered to direct the project before Marquand signed on as director. The production team relied on Lucas's storyboards during pre-production. While writing the shooting script, Lucas, Kasdan, Marquand, and producer Howard Kazanjian, I'm going to assume that is, spent 2 weeks in conference discussing the ideas to construct it. And the schedule pushed shooting to begin a few weeks early to allow ILM more time to work on the film's effects in post-production. The filming took place in England, California, and Arizona in 1982. It was released in 1983, 6 years to the day of the release of the first film, and received mostly positive reviews. God knows why. And it was the highest grossing film of 1983. I'm not gonna hide this anymore. Not that I've hidden it very well anyway. I don't like this film. I think it's boring. I will say this. I like the opening. I like the whole Jabba the Hutt and the kind of iconic Leia bikini stuff. Not that it's like leery or anything, but I think that scene in particular with Luke saving them, the whole Boba Fett thing and all that kind of stuff. Admittedly, it's a bit of a poor death for Boba Fett.
Terrible.
But yeah. And then from there, it just gets dull, I think, and it just gets boring. And the last time I watched this, and probably the last time I'm ever going to watch this, because I can't imagine myself going back to it anytime soon, was in school, and we were doing a film club, and we had to link it to the theme of celebration. So this wasn't the school that we're currently in, this was a different school. And one of the students said, "Oh, we could watch Return of the Jedi." And I said, "Well, how does that link to celebration?" And they said, "Because there's a celebration at the end."
Yeah.
And just to appease them, I thought, sod it, you know what, we'll do it. And then actually, I was just like, this is like, I'm showing this to a group of kids and they're all bored and I'm bored. And like, even when I think of it and I think about the speeder sequences, they're quite thrilling and I quite like them. And that makes me want to go, oh, well, it's not as bad as that, is it? But everything else was just dull exposition. I'm sure there's like a whole scene where Luke and Darth Vader are just walking together and talking together. And then it's just like, what is this film about at all? And yeah, like, feel free to disagree, but I just found it.
We will.
Yeah, my God, those are not the grievances I thought you would have, because there are plenty of grievances to have about this film.
Right, so pitch them to me, because admittedly, I've not seen this film in 7 years.
The
right?
genuine grievances.
It epitomizes the phrase, when it's good, it's very, very good, and when it's bad, it's horrid.
Yes.
This film, doesn't it? I think it's got some wonderful bits in it, like absolutely wonderful sequences. And then
I love Vader and Luke's conversations.
I do. That's a highlight of the entire trilogy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because it's this coming, like, after, it's the first time they're meeting in earnest after that I am your father reveal. And Luke has, like, Vader is still where he's at, but Luke has grown as a person. So the dynamic shifted and Vader just ain't ready for it. Luke full on gets in his head in that scene. It's great.
It's their confidence. Like, they're both 100% certain that they're going to turn the other one. And I love that, because I didn't know what was going to happen. And I mean, again, I was a child when I watched it the first time, I'm sure. So I'm sure if you watch it as an adult, it's very, very obvious that Vader's going to turn out to be good at the end. But it wasn't to me. And I was just watching it scared to death for Luke, just thinking, he's going to get turned to the dark.
And it's also when you are a bit older, you realize that Vader's rattled. When Luke leaves at the end, like, Vader went into this 100% confident, like Holly said, and Luke went in confident. Luke's the only one who left that conversation confident. And Vader was rattled as a result. It's a great dynamic between those two. And then when they get the Emperor involved as well.
And I love the Emperor in that fight. It's brilliant.
Emperor Ian McDiarmid, I think there is a shout for him being the single best actor in the entire saga.
I would
The
say
guy
that.
who plays the Emperor. The guy who plays the Emperor throughout.
Yeah.
Like whenever the Emperor's in a live action film, it's Ian McDiarmid. And he's when he's a younger man, he plays this ancient man. And then when he's older, he plays the younger version. And he is unbelievable. And I think there is something to be said. I know they're not particularly difficult characters, but I do love a good villain who knows that they're a villain and just loves that they're a villain. They love that they're nasty. They love that they're spiteful. They love that everything. They know they're evil, and they wake up thinking, what evil things can I do today? And they just live for spite and hatred, and I love it. I'm surprised you like the opening hour or so, because I actually think it's almost a separate film. Like
I think maybe that is why I like it, because I like that bit and I don't like the rest of the film that it ends up like.
Yeah, and it's just, and the Ewoks are usually a criticism that people have, and it's like,
I'm not a huge fan.
I get why, but like, it's at this point, it's very clear that it's a money's. When you said as well before, because I knew Spielberg was down to direct this, when you said for Empire that they got fines from the Directors Guild, wasn't it because George Lucas told them to do one when they said you've got to put credits at the beginning of your film?
Yeah, probably.
But that's like the only reason Spielberg could not direct this film. He would have directed it, but because he was like in with the Directors Guild, he couldn't like sever ties with them. So they got Marquand in, who was a bit of a yes man. And I think this is a weaker film. This is certainly, I don't think there's any shame in saying that, even I do like this film, it's a much weaker film than Empire, because
it's the weakest of this trilogy.
Definitely.
It is, yeah, it is.
George Lucas had much. It's because even in the first film, George Lucas had a lot of people creatively pushing back on him on some of like the character beats and the story beats. Whereas here, George Lucas will have been afforded a lot more control, especially by Marquand, who, even though he was the director, it was kind of one of those, like, he was almost like Lucas's hype man. It was like, yeah, why? You know what we should do? We should do what George says, and I'm putting my foot down as director. But saying that, he did have some good, like, I think my favorite idea he had was Vader taking his mask off at the end. That was a Marquand idea. He put that to Lucas, and Lucas was like, actually, yeah, I really like that. Okay. And so, do you not like as well that there are a few too many endings? Because I think that's a valid criticism.
Yeah, probably. That's probably the point where I pinned together my whole idea of this film, where I thought, it's going to end now, and then it didn't.
But it's more as well like you've got. Go on.
Just to say this as well, like if I was showing this in a film club, right, and it's going to be over 2 hours long in it, right? I would imagine there's probably a point where I thought, we might actually get this in 2 weeks rather than to drag it over into 3, because we only get an hour for film club. And then I feel like it's going to end, and then it doesn't. And then I feel like it's going to end again, and it doesn't. And then I've got to dismiss all the kids for us to come back 15 minutes later the week after just to watch it end 2 more times. That probably riled me anyway.
I don't quite mean like, because now that I've said that, there's a better way of wording it. I don't mean like Lord of the Rings, where it cuts to black and then there's another scene.
I was going to say, when I think about too many endings, I'm thinking about Lord of the Rings. I can't quite in my head work out what
it's not ending so much. It's not ending so much. Maybe conflicts is a better word, because you've got the battle down on Endor going on that you're trying to follow. You've got space battle that you're trying to follow, and the space battle in this is unbelievable, by the way. The space battle is so good. But you've got that confrontation with Luke, Vader, and the Emperor as well, and they're all kind of necessary, but it does muddle that final third a little bit.
New Death Star's not necessary. I quite happily have seen the film without that.
Yeah, I guess.
10 on IMDb, like 8.3 out of 10 on IMDb.
I think that's fair. I think that's not great, not terrible. Like
what? Like, well, not great, not terrible. Like 6 is not great, not terrible.
No, but like 6 would be like bang average. I think this is better than an average film.
What's
like,
Daredevil got?
Oh God, your barometer.
I think if I was grading it out of 10, I'd probably give it a 7.
I've heard this suggested as well. I think one thing that would really help to streamline this film, and it might even help it for you as well, Ads, is if I'm trying to think. So it's just kind of said that Jabba the Hutt lives on Tatooine. There's no particular reason he's got to live there. But if instead of the Ewoks on Endor or wherever you want to have the shield generator, that's where Jabba is with all of his like menagerie. So it's kind of a joint mission to go to this place, to take down the shield generator, but also to try and save Han Solo, because Han Solo is going to be key in the effort. And they could spend the time there trying to win over them. And instead of the Ewoks showing up for the battle at the end, you've got all these weird alien creatures. So you can still sell as many toys if you want to go the cynical route, but it's more visually interesting. And you've not got the image of, you've not got that image of, elite stormtroopers, so-called, being taken down by teddy bears. Because up till now, the stormtroopers have had excuses for why they're not such a great army. Like, so in episode 4, they deliberately let them leave the Death Star so they could track them. And that was kind of the idea of the ruthlessness. There wasn't that many, they did their job. The stormtroopers did their jobs incredibly well in episode 5. And then in episode 6, they're suddenly taken down by a bunch of teddy bears because George Lucas wanted to make his point that...
It's one of those, again, it's a Star Wars myth, I'm sure it's probably not correct, but wasn't originally going to be the Wookiee planet, Kashyyyk.
Yeah, it was going to be Wookiees.
Because
and just
that would be a very different situation, and I wish I'd seen that film.
But because he wanted it to be like these guerrilla tactics of like they're using twigs and stuff, and it's like, okay, but just because Chewie's got a gun, I don't know why that means no, like all the other Wookiees would have to have one. But you know, it's like it's Wookiee. They just switched it round. Like,
oh, I never noticed that.
Yeah, because that is 100%. That is 100% true. It was meant to be the and yeah, the Wookiees would have been great there instead of the Ewoks as well. But I do think I think it's fair to say the good stuff in this is brilliant. I love everything the only criticism I've got of Luke, Vader, and Palpy's bits, Palpatine is going to great lengths to try and tempt Luke. And it's based on something that we've not really seen Luke be tempted by. Like, you get the sense that he's just trying to wind him up and make him angry, because we've seen Luke get angry. But he keeps on claiming to him, it's like, oh, you can have the power of the dark side. And Luke's never been interested in power. Whereas if he was just trying to twist the knife a bit more and just annoy him and make him angry, which I think you can argue is what he's doing anyway, I think that'd be much better. And again, as a single lightsaber sequence, that bit where Luke snaps, because Vader dares to go, like, if you won't turn to the dark side, perhaps she will. That bit where you see Luke scream, and you're just like, and you and Vader have the same reaction. Oh no! And then he just takes his hand off, and he's fuming over the top of him, and it's just, nah, I'm not. No, Luke's gonna turn.
It's a real kind of trigger thing for me, that good guy, losing their morality.
Yeah.
That sometimes it's done very poorly, and I hate it. When it's done well, I absolutely love it, and I think they do it so well in this film. If I had to think of one, this is a different topic, but if I had to think of one kind of fix-it thing that I would like for this film, it would be more of a follow through from like one of the little threads that happens in Empire, where Luke leaves the training early and Yoda says there is another. And obviously we're talking about Leia. I would love to have seen more of Leia's force powers in Return of the Jedi. I think that would have been great, and that might have been one of the ways that they won the battle on Endor.
Yeah, like her using a mind trick or something, because she's always been a great persuader anyway. And maybe it's almost like a callback. It's like, well, she's always been really good at diplomacy, because she's kind of she's not like breaking their minds like Obi-Wan would, but she's just meant. But yeah,
it's the most damsel in distressy of the three films, which is a shame, because it's the third one. Her journey should have been more towards the powerful figure that we get in the latest trilogy, and instead it's a little bit downward.
The problem you got is that George Lucas by this point was kind of done, and like there was a plan that Vader would be the big bad in this, and then the Emperor would be the big bad in the next 3 films. And Leia was not going to be Luke's sister, because if you remember in Empire, there is a kiss that Luke gives to Leia that leaves a little bit too long to be brother and sister and for it to be okay. But like Luke's sister was meant to be training on the other side of the galaxy, and there was an idea that maybe Han could actually fall in love with her, and Luke and Leia could be a couple or whatever. But George was like, "I'll just make them brother and sister. I don't care anymore." Like he was just kind of done, because at that point he was going through a divorce, and it really like messed him up as a person. and he like that's why he took such a long break from directing so he could look after his kids and like get over the divorce effectively. And I think the film does suffer a bit from that. I've heard though, because you kind of talked about it before, Ollie, the gold bikini. I have heard, and it is potentially film myth, I've heard that Carrie Fisher requested that. I've heard that she requested something that, because she's like, oh, I've got all these genderless outfits, I wouldn't mind something a little bit more feminine. And they've then gone to the nth extreme of feminine clothing, but I don't think it was like, hey, Carrie, you're wearing this. You're gonna be the fantasy of many a teenage boy throughout the 80s and early 90s. Like,
I mean, I haven't heard that. I've certainly heard the opposite. At least Carrie Fisher was definitely capable of twisting that story around later after it came out. That,
as Carrie Fisher
she
is
was
one
then
to do,
the fantasy of every nerd boy under the age of 15. But yeah, in her stand-up, in her speech about George Lucas in his AFI big bonanza
induction,
thing, she seemed to make it very clear that the bikini was his idea and she was not on board with it. But it could have been either way.
Yeah, it's one of those again where it's probably just something that you're trying. It's a way of trying to get you to hate the character that's done that to them, but it doesn't necessarily. It's like we've got enough reasons to hate Jabba the Hutt. We don't need exploitation to be another one. Like, and like the girl, the Twi'lek that he feeds to the Rancor originally, like the implication, like when he's like tugging at her to come to him, but at the same time, like, does that mean you're not allowed to write a character who is a creeper like that? Like, it would be in his nature to be like, oh, I can have anything I want. I'm a crime boss. I'm going to do what I want, including treating these people like slaves in that regard. And yeah, that's probably something I'm not an authority to talk on. It's just like there have been those conflicting stories about how it's one of those. Carrie probably came round on it later, was like, sod it, it was funny. Like, why not?
Yeah.
Like, and like, yeah, it is. I do like that film. Like, it is the weakest of the originals, but it's weirdly, like when I mentioned the special editions before, this one isn't that affected by the special edition changes. Like, you've got the song change at the end and the song change in Jabba's part, and people are like,
the Force Ghosts.
Oh yeah, I forgot about Hayden Christensen for something. Why have they got him in there? Like, that's stupid. Like, but that's because that talks about the really touching moment at the end as well, where Vader takes his mask off and Luke finally like, it's that unmasking of this is the guy who's been the bad guy the entire guy. It's this sweet old man. Like, what the hell? How has he been? But he's only a sweet old man now. Like, if he'd taken his mask off earlier, he'd have tried to kill you. But he would have killed you. But like, and then when Luke sees the ghosts, it's almost like his vision of them. Like, why do we not get to see Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan if that's the case? I just remembered another criticism, actually, when I'm trying to defend this film. So I hate the conversation between Luke and Obi-Wan on Dagobah in this film. So Yoda, they had to put in a scene where Yoda full on reveals that Vader is Luke's father, because the general public was still like, no, can't quite believe that. Okay. I swear there was a draft of this conversation where Obi-Wan's Force Ghost apologizes to Luke saying, I wanted to tell you that Vader was your father, but Yoda said I could not do that. Yoda said I had to keep that from you. I really wanted to tell you. And that would help fuel Luke's anger, because he's like, well, the people who I've been kind of putting my stock in have lied to me this entire time about something massively big. Like, at a key moment in my life, at my lowest point, I was then sent even lower, and I could have been prepped for that. And it also feeds into that thing where the Emperor could have then been like, I'd have told you the truth. I'm telling you the truth right now, and that would be the temptation for Luke is, I'm always going to be truthful with you. I'm going to be brutally truthful with you, even if I need to be. Whereas the Jedi have lied to you this entire time.
This is a big thing that's going to come up later when we talk about the new trilogy.
And it's just, instead, what we get is, well, the man I know died, and he was replaced by someone who's a stranger to me. It's like even Luke's reaction. He looks him square in the face, like, what I told you was true from a certain point of view. A certain point of view. I lost my hand, Obi-Wan. Don't be trying to get out of this on a goddamn technicality. You lied to me. There's no getting around that. And just that could have been so much more powerful. The idea that your teachers are flawed. The idea that your teachers will make mistakes. They will get things wrong in their teaching of you. And that can make pupils annoyed, but him reconciling that and realizing, well, they were trying to protect, even if they did it for all the wrong reasons, they were trying to protect me. And the Emperor being like, I'm going to tell you the truth. Like, yeah, that'd be my biggest change in the film. I would have Obi-Wan just come out and be honest with Luke at that point. None of these would fix it enough for Adam, though, would they?
No. I think I might be being a bit stubborn.
Do you not like Luke's green lightsaber in this one as well?
Yeah, I like that. I mean,
do you know why it's there as well?
You did this to me in like one of the other ones where it was like, do you know why? And I was like, no. And then it's the thing. And...
But if you think about the first time he gets it out, they're out in bright daylight and there's a blue sky behind him. So it's much harder to key in the effect for a blue blade on against that blue sky. Because if you look at all the original promo material, where the title of the film was actually Revenge of the Jedi, he's got a blue lightsaber. And they try to do it in the effects, and it's like, well, it doesn't look that good. And I think someone just suggested, make it green. You know, we don't need to question it at this point. It's only but like I think he suits a green lightsaber with his black clothes.
To me, my understanding of the difference between green and blue, and this might have come out of like fans making this the canon thing, is that green means that you're a Jedi Master or Jedi Knight, and blue means that you're an apprentice.
In the games, it's different specializations.
Right.
So blue is like you're the knight, you're more focused on battle. Green is that you're more focused on diplomacy. Yellow, which is a Jedi one, but feels to me like it should be Sith. But yellow is you're more focused on technical things.
No, I kind of
in the games anyway.
I kind of love that the Sith only have red. And yeah, but like
purple means that you're Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah, purple does just mean that you're Samuel L. Jackson, and that's
there's no reason
color.
for that. It's just Samuel L.
Yeah,
Jackson.
but like it all does stem from so like Vader will have had a red one originally just to set him apart from her because they were all white originally. In all the concept art, it's just beams of white light, like Ahsoka has in in Clone Wars and stuff like that. Whereas they just added a bit of color to it because it makes it easier to see. But then they differentiated between Obi-Wan and Vader because Jedi Sith. And then the green one, literally just stems from this practical need to have it against a blue sky. And I happen to think it's almost like a transition to the dark side as well. Like he's not blue anymore. The blue is like this pure good color, and green's like, ooh, he's changing a bit. But and like because there are plenty of because the whole point is you're meant to have a crystal that represents you, that's your crystal. So it wouldn't make sense for I'm a Jedi Knight, I'm going to get a promotion to a master, so I need to switch out my crystal now for a green one. It's who you are. Like there will be like Coyote-Mundi's a Jedi Master, he's on the Jedi Council, but he has a blue lightsaber.
Because the whole like lore of it and the development of the world and things like that all came after these films. I think a lot of that's put down to the fans.
Yes.
And like comic books that came after it and all that kind of stuff. I remember subscribing to, it was either subscribing to a magazine or buying a book or buying like an encyclopedia thing. And it was, this is the timeline of the Star Wars universe. And it was massive. It wasn't just inside that kind of trilogy. It was like all of these things happened afterwards. All of these things happened before. And then, you know, like obviously since Disney have got hold of it now, we're going to explore all of these things.
Yeah.
Because we can do.
And you can build your own at Disneyland only for... but then it's
insane.
But then I like that the most powerful characters in the best versions of what we're talking about, hint for later, don't like lightsabers. Yoda, you can't imagine touching a lightsaber. You can just imagine him kind of force. And the Emperor actively mocks lightsabers in Return of the Jedi. And I love that about him. He's like, he's above them. And then when he wants to hurt Luke, he shoots lightning at him. And again, it's this idea that an effect is there to tell a story more than anything. Like, he doesn't shoot lightning out of his hands like these days. Any dark side user, you know, if you're playing a video game, if you're a dark side user, oh, lightning! It's like, that's just a dark side ability now. Whereas you can always think of that back then as the Emperor could probably, if the Emperor wanted to kill Luke flat out, he could probably just stop his heart. But he's annoyed with him because the Luke hasn't turned. So he wanted him to suffer. He wanted him to feel pain. He wanted him to feel vulnerable. He wanted him to be hopeless before he died. And a visual representation of that is shooting lightning at him. Like, it's nothing to do with, oh, he's reached Sith level 1000, therefore he can shoot lightning out of his fingertips. It's a visual metaphor for what is happening in the story, and it's indicative of the emotions of the characters. And that all goes to pot from this film on for a bit, and then it kicks up again, and then... Yeah.
Well, because I was going to say Yoda gets his lightsaber out in Attack of the Clones.
Exactly, and I am not happy about that. We will talk more later about that.
Well, we'll talk that. Right, let's nip this one in the bud now then. So that's the original trilogy wrapped up and done. We're going to be back next week for the prequel trilogy. So in the meantime, you can help support Farrand on Film by following us on Twitter at Farrand on Film, by liking us on Facebook at facebook.com/Farrand on Film, heading over to our sponsor Offworld Tees and using the code Farrand for 15% off your order, leaving a 5-star review at your favorite podcast provider. Stay safe, look after each other, and we will see you next week.